Let's go ahead and do that intro then.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I'm Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club. So, Steve, welcome back. Everything is all turned around here. We are doing the issues in all sort of mixed up order because, for some reason, Tales to Astonish and Tales to Suspense happened in one order last month, and they're happening in a different order this month, and they're in the middle of a crossover. So we have saved Tales to Astonish for this episode, which is what we're going to do first. And we'll also, in this episode, be covering X-Men, Avengers, and Strange Tales, which...
Not necessarily in that order.
All right, so let's go ahead and jump in first with Tales to Astonish, featuring Submariner and Hulk. On the cover, we have Submariner fighting Iron Man, and it says the power of Iron Man. Now, of course, I wonder, is the idea they're crossing over because Namor needs Iron Man's ratings, or Iron Man needs Namor ratings, or they're both going to help each other and they're both struggling? I don't know. I don't know how sales work. We have on the cover Iron Man shooting a repulsor ray at Namor horizontally. I generally think of him only being able to fire his repulsors perpendicular from his hand.
So it almost looks like it's coming out of his fingertips.
Yeah. I don't think that's how that works, but other than that, perfectly fine. Gene Colan.
Well, it's not like Gene Colan is the regular artist on Iron Man.
Yeah, I know. He's not used to drawing Iron Man. That brings us to the question of, will Gene Colan be drawing this issue? And as it turns out, he is about to go out sick. Imperious Rex, it says, potted by Smilin' Stan, who then went on vacation, scripted by Rascally Roy, who wishes he had, begun by Gallant Gene, who caught the flu bug after drawing the first 2 pages, finished by King Kirby, who drew the last 10 pages, then asked who Submariner was. Of course, joke, because Kirby had been so involved with Submariner. Inked by Darlin Dick, who else? Lettered by adorable Arthur, who? So we pick up, where we left off.
This one doesn't have anything about lettered.
So strange. It says potted by, scripted by, begun by, finished by, inked by, lettered by.
It must have been stuck on and fell off. Huh.
So funny how many things were right in the original books and wrong in the Marvel.
I know, right? Yeah.
Marvel Online version. So it says here, don't try reading this staggering saga until you've thoroughly devoured Suspense number 80, now on sale, Natch, or else, boy, are you going to be confused. Well, that's not true at all, because if you didn't read Suspense number 80, that was just 12 pages of Namor and Iron Man beating each other up, and you would never guess that you had missed it. And in fact, I read this issue not having read Suspense number 80 yet. I thought they were saying that we should read Suspense number 79, where they set up this fight. I had not read Suspense number 80. I didn't even realize that issue existed until I got to it later. So this is a big old mess. As we left off last issue, and as if we had never read the other issue, Iron Man and Namor are fighting. They're beating each other up. Gene Colan is doing a perfectly fine job, inked by Dick Ayers. However, then suddenly something happens on page 3, and suddenly we have King Kirby. We have Jack King Kirby doing the penciling. It could not look more different from Colan. It is a total record scratch in terms of the art, and it looks awesome. Of course, we've seen Jack Kirby drawing Iron Man very little. It was one of the only Marvel books that he never was the regular artist on. So they have been beating each other up Colan style, and then they spend another several pages beating each other up Kirby style. And I am greatly enjoying the Kirby pages as they just pound on each other. And, I mean, that's basically it. I mean, I'm just flipping through the issue, and we're on page 8. Eventually, some cops intervene, but just very briefly, and then they go back to beating each other, and then Namor suddenly occurs to me, like, what am I doing? Why am I here? I was supposed to be chasing after Dorma and Krang. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be having this fight. I'm going to go back in the sea. And then he jumps back in the sea. And then Stan or Jack or somebody seemingly forgets whose book this is. Because then it's like, and then Tony Stark goes home and he decides to call Senator Bird and have a conversation. No, Stan or Jack, this is Namor's book. We should follow Namor into the sea. We should follow him chasing after Krang and Dorma, who knows whatever happened to them. And instead we go home with Iron Man and have him calling up Senator Bird. Like, what?
Yes.
This is supposed to be Namor's book. And then that is the end of this issue. What did you think of this issue?
I mean, it was tons of fun. It really was a severe record scratch moment, as you said. But what we get in here, and I'm guessing that Jack Kirby was just like, okay, I've got more pages to do. Let me just go ahead and do some crazy fight scenes and just not think too much about what's going on them. But this ends up producing some really classic and much homaged panels. Lots of times when people are arguing with people from our generation or younger about what is great about Kirby, for people like us and the ones younger than us who did not grow up with him and may look at him and just find him old fashioned, panels from this issue are what are often shared.
Like what
Um,
panels?
page 4, panel 1, and actually, I think I've seen page 5, panel 4 homaged as well, where Iron Man is just sort of jumping out of the way of something. Page 6, panel 1. I'm pretty sure I've seen all of these things used as examples of the power of Kirby's art. We're seeing Kirby doing large panels here as well. It's appropriate for the action and the power of what we're looking at. But even more than that, it lets him get through these unexpected pages that dropped in his lap faster.
Yes.
But it sort of has the feel in some ways of something where you have to improvise right at the last moment, and then there's some kind of magic in the energy that you end up getting out of something like that. The rest of my family saw Beetlejuice on Broadway when I was sick with COVID. I was supposed to be there, but apparently everybody in Beetlejuice got COVID within the last day or two before the show was supposed to start. And so they were just calling up people who had been in the show previously, people who were like coming in and just learning their part in 2 days and all this kind of stuff. And according to them, and we've seen it there and then we saw it on tour as well, that show on Broadway just had that crackling energy of the adrenaline. And that's what this feels like to me.
Yeah. Obviously, Kirby doing a lot of work, doing Fantastic Four, doing Thor, doing Tales of Asgard, and continuing to do layouts on Hulk and several other books. Then I imagine that probably took Colin a while to realize, like, I'm too sick, I'm not going to be able to finish this book. Kirby was probably called in the last second and just kills it.
Yeah.
He's just having the time of his life. Just as we had Avengers #3, where you had the Avengers versus Namor and Hulk, and then later they did an additional issue of Thor that's just like, let's go back to that battle and show some more battle pages. This sort of feels like that too, where it's like, hey, that was a great issue. Let's revisit it. Let's just have more pages of Iron Man and Namor wailing on each other.
Yeah.
Speaking of Kirby, let's go ahead and move on to The Battle Cry of the Boomerang, the Incredible Hulk story. Another cheery chapter in the most imaginative, most spectacular super serial of all time, passionately presented by Stan Lee writer, Jack Kirby designer, Bill Everett illustrator, so penciling and inking, Artie Simek letterer, and a touch of the muse inspirer. So I'll say with the Iron Man, I always liked Ayers inks on Kirby more than you did. I really enjoyed Ayers inks on Kirby and Iron Man, and I really missed it. I missed the look of Kirby and Ayers. Nowhere near as good as Kirby and Senat, but 10 times better than Kirby and Coletta. But here we have something very different, with Kirby just doing presumably rudimentary sketches, and then Bill Everett very much heavily penciling and inking the Hulk book. Doesn't look like Kirby at all. It looks entirely like Everett. The amount of crossover between the Tyrannus storyline and the Boomerang storyline is just silly. He's still in the first panel down in Tyrannus's underworld lair, and he's still teleporting up.
Yeah, that surprised me. I was like, wait, hadn't he teleported up earlier in this story? But I guess
Yes.
maybe not.
They just decided, let's overlap these stories even more. Well, Hulk comes up to the ground and is instantly getting blown up by army artillery, not because they're trying to kill him, but because he's on a missile testing range. And we all know that the Hulk versus military artillery is the lifeblood of this book, so let's go ahead and include some more. They then realize he's there, they try to shoot him, he jumps away. So meanwhile, Glenn Talbot has returned. Glenn Talbot and Rick Jones with smudges on their face, which I guess is what happens when you get kidnapped by Boomerang. You end up smudged. They explain that Betty's been taken hostage by Boomerang. Talbot is not happy about this. I gotta say, this may be the all-time top Marvel month for villain bickering. We had an epic villain bicker going on between Mass Marauder and Gladiator and Daredevil. We had Red Skull killing one of his most loyal henchmen who'd been with him for 60 years and killing him for a minor infraction in a really gruesome way. And then we've got
20 years.
Yeah, you're right. And now we have the Secret Empire who are controlling Boomerang, and they're killing each other. One of them's like, hey, press this button here. It's like, I jet of gas. Someone booby-trapped the sending set. They're like, all of us who stand between number 9 and the leadership of the Secret Empire are liable to meet the same fate as number 5. So they're bickering and killing each other. Meanwhile, Hulk, even though he has had a very tumultuous return to the surface world, has very quickly figured out what's going on and knows now that Boomerang has escaped with Betty. Does he just happen to run into them?
I think so. This is kind of like Iron Man just running into Krang and Dorma, the other issue.
Yeah. I think the Hulk is just leaping along, escaping the government, and suddenly it's like, hey, there's the woman I love being carried away by a supervillain. I guess I'll intervene. And
We do have at least a couple of panels in this issue where it looks like Hulk is flying, even though it's clearly a plot point that was included in the art that he cannot fly, that he can only leap. But on both page 3, panel 3, he's jumping out of that cave with a little thoom on the bottom, and he's arcing in a way that that one you could just be like, maybe it's just a weird angle we're looking at. But page 6, panel 1, you see him jump, thoom, thoom, and then his next jump, he's definitely doing a big swoop in the air. I think Jack is still just a little bit like, I still think Hulk should fly. I know he doesn't at this point, but I'm just going to make it look that way from time to time, just because.
so the Hulk, yes, suddenly just happens upon Boomerang flying with Betty. He says, that voice, I know it. Hulk must help. He gets Boomerang to land. Like, the number one rule of Boomerang is that Boomerang will do anything to avoid throwing a boomerang. And instead, he's got these red metal washers, and he decides, I need a new weapon. I will attach them together into big blobs of big red discs. And I will throw the big blobs at the Hulk, which are shockingly effective. Then finally he decides, okay, fine, I'll also throw a boomerang. It is my name. The Hulk gets zapped by the boomerang, is feeling even worse. Meanwhile, Gwen Talbot and Thunderbolt Ross are going off in a Jeep. They've got tanks, they've got Jeeps, they got army trucks, and Rick Jones just hitches a ride. He's just hanging on to the back of the truck as it drives off. This guy is going to get shot in the head at some point, but not today. Hulk beats up Boomerang. Boomerang decides to get in a Secret Empire helicopter and fly away. The Hulk is left alone with Betty, who is afraid of him. And then the mighty behemoth looks down at the fragile girl beside him, and she desperately studies his unblinking eyes, trying to find the slightest trace of the man she loves behind their cold, hard, merciless stare. Next issue, Hulk continued, next ish. So, next issue and next ish. That is this issue. It is, I don't like Boomerang, and this is extremely poor plotting to have him just run across them. I like the Secret Empire, okay, but this is a pretty not good Hulk issue.
Yeah, the first incarnation of Boomerang is just a mess. They introduce him as an ex-baseball player who's like this suave ladies' man dressed up in a tux, which doesn't really necessarily go with former baseball player. And then he puts on this blousy purple, red, and white thing with washers all over him and calls himself Boomerang and has a big B on his chest and a little boomerang type thing looking on his helmet. But as you said, seems to just throw his boomerang as an absolute last resort. He is just a mess. One thing I forgot to mention, this is very just silly. But in the previous story, I noticed that when the cops show up for the Iron Man Namor fight, one of the cops says to the other one, all right, Logan, now, while the two of them are close together, fire that sleep gas and do it fast. It's just weird that Logan would come out as a name when now, of course, that name is indelibly imprinted with Wolverine these days.
Yes.
But, like Logan, that was a weird. But then I guess the same month, Stan Lee did have that kid named, what was it, Selwyn? So I don't know, maybe he's just playing around with silly names. So when you were talking about Rick Jones, just he's going to get himself killed, Talbot has just been ordered to stay behind to guard the missile base because, he is chief of security, and also he has failed to rescue Betty, and he really, really wants to go, and he's like, oh, it's my duty to stay, but if anything should happen, and Rick says, well, maybe you got to stay here and follow orders, Major. Talbot says, what do you mean, Jones? Says, I mean that I'm a civilian, for now anyway, so therefore he can do anything he wants on this army base.
That's how the army works, right? The civilians are allowed to run in the place.
Exactly. And he says, and us civilians don't have to stay behind to guard anything. Leastway is not when there's a chance of catching up with the Hulk again. And yeah, that's when he just jumps into the back of a truck. Everyone involved with this book, I'm pretty sure, well, I don't know about Everett, but certainly the two people coming up with the story were both in the army. Right? I
Yes.
mean, even if Stan Lee only had a job working in the press department or whatever, he still had to go through basic training. He has to know how this stuff works to some extent. Yeah. it's it's silly. But like I said, fun, but this story with Boomerang, I'm less willing to cut it slack.
Yes, indeed. Not going to do it. Okay.
So are we moving on then to Strange Tales?
No, let's move on to X-Men.
X-Men. Okay, we are moving on to X-Men. So this is X-Men 23, To Save a City. Action lovers, this one's for you. And we see on the cover the X-Men fighting the lamest collection of bad guys we've seen in the Marvel Universe yet. Well, I don't know. Is it the lamest? We probably had lamer, but
In
certainly
terms of having a super group of lameness, having lameness from all over being concentrated in one place, this group is right up there.
yes. And it looks as though maybe the X-Men are on the front of the Lincoln Memorial, having the fight
Yeah.
off to the side of it. And the Lincoln Memorial is getting destroyed right now. One of the columns is being disintegrated.
Yes.
That's a problem. Edited in Ecstasy by Stan Lee. That seems weird. Written in Rapture by Roy Thomas. Drawn in Delight by Werner Roth. So he is going by his actual name this time. Delineated in Depth by Dick Ayers. Lettered in a Lawn Chair by Artie Simek.
Yeah. So when I first read these issues, I was like, oh, Jake Evan is off the book now. Now there's someone named Werner Roth on the book. And he's just such a generic artist. I didn't even notice it was the same artist. I was just like, yeah, they've replaced a generic artist called Jake Evan with a generic artist called Werner Roth. And he just doesn't have enough style or distinction for me to go like, oh, this is clearly the same guy.
Yeah, that's fair. When last we left off, the X-Men had been captured by Count Nefaria, who I believe actually does end up referring to his illusion dream powers in this
Yes.
issue. Last time I was saying that, they were just counting on us remembering that, because it's like, where are all these illusions coming from? So he is going to essentially blackmail them into blackmailing the U.S. government out of what is it? I'm thinking of the Austin Powers bit where it's like, $1 million, and they just laugh like, dude, that's nothing. And then he goes back in time and asks for $100 billion, and they all laugh at him like, dude, that's just not a thing. So I don't remember how many millions of dollars he's asking for here, but it's presumably a large amount in 1966 dollars. So
Yes.
he has some kind of a dome that is dropped over Washington, D.C. No one can get in or out. Apparently, it also has the ability to suck all of the oxygen out from inside of it when Nefaria wants it to. Nefaria then creates an illusion of the X-Men going into the Capitol and demanding this money. Now, when the X-Men are coming up the steps, Angel is saying, "Stand aside, guard. We've come about the shield which covers the city." This is on page 4.
Yeah.
And the guard says, "The X-Men, there's a special committee meeting about that right now. Go on in." It's like, again, I don't think this is how that works. Oh yeah, so it's $100 million. So split the difference between $1 million and $100 billion. They're getting $100 million.
I note that Iceman is riding an ice slide up the steps. I generally think of his ice slides only working when he's going down a slope instead of up a slope, but
Well, this one is an illusion.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, illusions can do whatever the hell they want to do.
Right. The X-Men are actually still chained up in a dungeon. So the illusory X-Men come in and say, "We need $100 million or else we will kill everyone in the city by sucking out all the oxygen." Professor X, I guess he had deliberately disconnected from them mentally during their vacation so that he could have some privacy from them and they from him. But a general has called him, and I guess because the X-Men are supposedly involved and he is an expert in mutants. So then he's like, oh, maybe you ought to check in on those kids. And so he mentally contacts them. He's trying to mentally
So,
contact them, but he's not able to at first.
so of course we've skipped over on page 4. They're all like, "Hey, we're all shackled. Jean, can you fix it?" And she's like, "Nope. Whoever designed these shackles did so with me in mind. They're too complicated for me to undo without first having studied the locks. If only we could manage to mentally contact the professor." And then the professor is able to figure out, "Jean, you don't have to undo the locks. You just have to undo Scott's visor, and he'll be able to blow his face clamp off. Heaven forbid Jean ever be allowed to figure out anything on her own in any of these books. It drives me crazy.
Yeah, good point. Also, on that page, one thing I neglected to mention is when the illusory X-Men all just vanish into thin air, two of the Capitol guards, one of them says, "Hey, they vanished, all five of them. Is that one of their mutant powers too?" Says, "I don't know, Charlie, but with those muties, anything's possible." It's like, yes, yes. One of the last times that a mutant did anything to Washington, D.C., he was literally called the Vanisher. So
Yes.
that might be a plausible power. So yes, Jean frees Cyclops' eye beams, and so then Cyclops frees the rest of them. They then barge in on Nefaria, and Nefaria is saying essentially, okay, you can either go and physically pick up the money for me, or you can take the blame when I kill everyone in Washington, D.C., since they've seen you supposedly being the one do this. So they're like, okay, I guess we're now his bag man, which,
Yeah.
like, yep. He's got us. Let's just do this. We'll take his money. Meanwhile, Nefaria's other actual henchmen are all plotting to overthrow Count Nefaria, and then of course they will all have a free for all amongst themselves because
I'm telling
everybody.
you,
uh
this is the ultimate Marvel month for villains fighting each other. This is the most we will ever see. I'm going to go ahead and call it.
And also, right before he sent the X-Men out to Count Nefaria, so this is on page 6, panel 4. Here's one of the places where he is referred to as the Master of Dreams in a caption. Nefaria says, "They've done it. They've agreed to my terms. The Senate has just voted a special appropriation to be picked up by the X-Men at the expiration of the 3-hour period." And it's just like, Roy, we do not need to get into the mechanics of how the money was gotten together. Congress had to get together and they had to vote. And actually,
I'm
that's.
just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill.
And to come to think of it, the reason I had screen captured this is any bills involving spending constitutionally have to start in the House.
True.
So, or maybe he's saying, okay, now the Senate has ratified it. Anyway, this is why you don't get into these details, Roy. It's not good for anybody. So Professor X is frustrated that the military has completely bought into the idea that the X-Men are behind this. So he enters his trance state and sends out his astral projection form to go find out what the heck is happening. And he looks like he's running through the
I love
air.
this is not the first time we've seen this where he sends out his astral projection form and suddenly not only is he not in his wheelchair, but he has to run like hell to get across town. This is very much how Chet Gould would draw people running in the old Dick Tracy strip.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I can see that.
he looks like Junior Tracy running to a crime scene, and I like his long stride.
Professor X figures out what's going on and needs to figure out next what to do about it. The X-Men go through a hole in the dome that Nefaria has created for them. As soon as they get in there, we see that they're all being tracked by the lamos. I'm just going to call them the lamos. Well, and the military. So both of them are keeping an eye. So the X-Men come in, they take the money. Angel flies down and snatches it from the arms of whoever was supposed to be meeting them. Because, why not just still act like you actually are a criminal because you are being blackmailed? And don't go up and say, guys, we are being blackmailed to do this. I know this looks terrible, but we have to do it or else you're all going to die and we're all going to get blamed. So we don't want to do this. No, they just go through the act as though they were actually doing this on purpose.
Well, we've all seen how well it works for people in the Marvel Universe to say, I have been brain switched. I am not this person in this body, and no one ever believes you. You can claim anything in the Marvel Universe, and no one's ever going to believe you.
This is true. So at this point, the issue gets kind of fun. It sort of becomes a what kind of comedy do you refer to the things like Cannonball Run and stuff like that, where just like all sorts of crazy stuff is just. Is there a name for that kind of comedy?
Mix up? I don't know. It's things madcap mix up.
Yeah, it becomes a madcap comedy. There we go. I'll go with that. So they're just basically playing this game of hot potato with the bearer bonds that they're holding on to. And they at one point also make another comment about, good thing that the government had these bearer bonds just standing around for some reason that they could give us after they voted to give it to us. It's just
Yes.
Once again, Roy, stop it. It's not doing anything. So we got a really fun game of the bag being snatched, being passed from one X-Man to the other to get away from the bad guys, being snatched by the bad guys, being snatched back by the X-Men. And it actually is a lot of fun. At one point, Cyclops and the Unicorn are both shooting their power rays at each other, and they're basically canceling each other out where they meet. And that's one of those things where, as a kid, it's like, I don't know, is that how it would work? Sure, why not? But
Sure,
then,
why not?
but then now, looking at this, I'm just like, okay, not only is it not how it works, but you can just barely swivel your head and then your beam is going to not be hitting the other beam. You've got to really concentrate to keep it that still.
The Superman movie, Man of Steel, is a terrible movie. And I thought it was funny at the end where like Zod is shooting his eye beams at people. And then he looks over and sees some people standing in the corner and says, I will gradually move my eye beams over to them and then kill them. All right, you've just looked over and seen that they're there. They should be dead already. Like, you can't look in one direction while shooting presumably your eye beams are shooting in the direction that you are looking, are they not? I don't know how this works. Superman then says, oh, I must break my rules and kill Zod because he is slowly moving his eye beams over to these people. And I thought it was really dumb.
Yeah, I never watched that movie. I heard bad things. I had no interest. I think out of the modern DC movies, I saw the first really terrible Suicide Squad just because our friend Chris Walker was in town and he's like, hey, it just came out. You want to go see a dumb movie? And we're like, oh, yeah, sure. Why not? So that and the first Wonder Woman movie. And I think that might be it.
Okay. You are not up to date. Most of those
Yeah.
movies are just awful. And
Yes.
so you can feel
Well,
better about doing it.
that's what I've heard. So
Yes.
I guess I did see all of the Christopher Nolan Batman films. But talking about Werner Roth being a mediocre comics artist, you were talking about his style. But in terms of visual storytelling, in the previous episode, I was talking about the very simple but elegant visual storytelling that John Romita Sr. was doing in the fight scene in Daredevil. Here we have the exact opposite. So on page 14, we see the Unicorn trying to use his power horn on the military tanks. But it turns out that the military who's in here actually isn't in here. These are more illusions being created by Count Nefaria. And then the next panel switches to looking at the X-Men face on while they're pointing basically behind us, the viewer, and describing what Unicorn is doing that we never see.
Yes.
Marvel Girl, he's flying using tiny rocket lifts in his boots. Angel says, I'll never catch him at that speed. He'll be out of sight in seconds. Iceman says, we can't quit now. We've got to go get him. And it's like, this is what comics are supposed to be. You're supposed to
Yeah.
see him do that. What is going on? So Professor X, he's checking back into his hotel for some reason, and just basically told the general, "Yeah, I need to go lie down. Oh, good luck with the rest of this." And of course, the military man is not happy. Yeah, and it's a little confusing because some of those soldiers apparently were just illusions, but apparently some of them are not because they're actually fighting some of them, and it gets very, very confusing. At one point, Iceman, when fighting the actual army and icing up one of their tank cannons, what do they call those things? What's the thing that's on the turret is that just a tank gun? The big gun that sticks out of the turret.
Oh, it's called a schlong. No, I have no idea what it's called.
Okay, so Iceman is icing up the muzzle of the gun that sticks out of the turret, and Iceman says to the soldiers, sorry, dog faces, we're all for target practice, but not when we're the target. And, apparently Dogface was a nickname for soldiers in the army way back when, but I really don't think of a 15-year-old teenager who doesn't have a military family as, it just seems weird for him to break that one out.
Been reading Sergeant Rock comics.
Did they use that a lot in Sergeant Rock?
I don't know. I haven't read any Sergeant Rock comics in a long time.
I've never read any Sergeant Rock, actually.
They're good.
Anyway, the X-Men deliver the package, but it turns out that they didn't actually have the bonds in there. What is it that they did? I'm trying to remember what the switcheroo was. Anyway, one way or the other,
This
Professor...
is like This is like watching What's Up Doc. Don't try to keep track of which switcheroo is in which place.
Right. Or I was also thinking of like the end of Reservoir Dogs. Like, wait,
Yeah.
who shot who? How did they all end up dead? That doesn't. There seems to be one person who needs to be left alive. Anyway, somehow Professor X has just created an illusion that the X-Men had picked up the money and there wasn't any money in it in the first place. And there's a whole thing where Professor X is like somehow walking around with some kind of braces on his legs. It's really confusing. Anyway,
Yes.
at the end, Jean gets a letter that had come while Jean was gone, and she reads it and then says, "It's all right, Professor. It isn't something I can hide for long, much as I might wish to. Tomorrow, I must leave the X-Men forever." And then we're told that the next issue is going to be against someone called the Locust, and I do not care. So that is the entirety I have to say about that issue. Anything you want to mention?
So we once again have Professor X just being ludicrously powerful. Yeah, first of all, he can walk now. He's wearing lightweight, flexible metal braces on his legs with a transistorized power source hooked onto his belt that allow him to walk. And then the bad guys get away with the money. And then it's like, oh no, we just thought we'd gotten away with the money because we had mental illusions put into our minds by Professor X. Professor X is like, the money was actually under the table the whole time. And it's like, this is just so powerful, and they keep going back and forth of like, trying to come up with ways to keep Professor X from just taking care of the problem at the last minute. And then it just never lasts. And then they're like, nope, let's go back to having Professor X take care of the problem at the last minute with his extremely powerful mind powers. I thought that Roy Thomas got off to a good start on this book, but he's not being helped by Werner Roth, and he's not being helped by bringing in the world's lamest C-list villains. And this is just not a good issue. I like having words on the cover again. The last issue was super creepy with no words on the cover. Or I guess maybe that was 2 issues ago. This is a really lame issue. This is a bad Marvel comic.
Yep. Bad comic. Bad
Bad,
comic. So
bad comic.
we will roll up a newspaper and hit the comic with it. All right.
Yeah. This book is just going to keep suffering until about issue 65 or so. We're on issue 23. So that's, we've got about 40 more bad issues to
And
go.
it'll be far too late at that point. Well, no, actually, doesn't Steranko come in before that?
Steranko just does like 2 issues and,
Okay.
does not turn the book around until Adams comes on board. So 40 more issues to go, folks. Then X-Men will get good. Don't worry. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to Strange Tales. The Enemy Within. Again, it just lists Nick Fury, Agent Shield on the cover and has an all-shield cover, except for Doctor Strange showing up in the corner box. We've got Nick, Dum-Dum, and Sitwell on the cover being zapped by beekeepers. One of the things I didn't really realize until this issue is whatever happened to Gabe Jones. There's not a lot of black people in the Marvel Universe, and I always appreciated getting them wherever we can. Gabe Jones is still in the Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos book, but he was also, it originally was Nick and Dum-Dum and Gabe, and granted, Gabe never had a ton of personality and never was bringing a ton to this book, and Sitwell, I think, is a better character and has more personality, but I just think it's a shame that Sitwell had to displace the black man when he came on board.
Huh.
But,
yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Oh, and by the way, just for people out there in podcast land, when Matt says beekeepers, he's referring to the AIM goons in their beekeeper outfits.
Yes. But of course, Nick Fury still can't figure out their aim. He still thinks they're them. He can't figure out the name and them are related. Nick Fury comes back from his mission, is yelling at people. People are starting to grumble that such an uncouth guy should not be leading an elite spy agency.
Well, I think it's being egged on by the legitimate arm of AIM, that they are lodging complaints about him, and now the top brass are jumping on that bandwagon. That's the impression I got.
Yes, and then we return to Count Bornag Royale, representative of AIM, who are still pretending to be good guys, dealing with S.H.I.E.L.D. and indeed saying, like, you should fire Fury, and they're like, maybe we should. Meanwhile, AIM beekeepers attack the barbershop, which we have not seen in a while, and tie up the 3 people who work in the barbershop. But then, flying out of a hole in the ground come Nick and Dum-Dum and Sitwell, and they start fighting back against the beekeepers. Turns out that Dum Dum wears a metal cap under his bowler at all times. Who knew this?
When our Facebook feed got shut down for a few days, I at one point posted to the Marvel Comics 1961 to 1986 Facebook group that I do a lot of interacting with. And I said, hey, I'm sorry, I haven't been making my posts. If anyone has missed them, which you might not, but this is happening with Facebook. And meanwhile, just so that this post has something to do with the theme of this group, here's a picture of Dum Dum getting knocked on the head and wearing a skull cap under his bowler. So
Yes.
it's because I mean that's quality stuff right there.
It is. So then they end up beating the beekeepers. They open the door where I always find this a little suspicious whenever they're like, we're taking over this installation. Let's tie up everybody who works here. It's like, no, you would just kill them. But instead, they've tied everybody up. The black shoeshine person, the woman manicurist, and the white male barber have all been tied up. They are untied. Then of course, Dum Dum decides he has the right to lean in and kiss the manicurist for no reason. She then chases him around trying to beat him up, but does not, call HR, which presumably would be the better thing to do.
What was there HR in 1966? Was that even a thing?
One would hope. So then cut back to Count Bornag Royale, who is still plotting to get Fury fired. And that is the end of the issue. So once again, I didn't do the credits. Unfortunately, we've got script Stan Lee, layouts Jack Kirby, pencils Don Heck, inks Mickey DeMeo. Kirby and DeMeo are both talented artists, but Heck is dominating. I am not a fan of the art on this issue. It looks more like Heck than it does like Kirby or DeMeo. And I'm not crazy about this issue. Great looking forward to Stranko coming on the book. AIM are fine villains. Certainly Marvel Comics is going to get a lot of good use out of AIM over the years. But I'm very tired, given that over in Captain America totally understands that the beekeepers work for AIM and has for months. I'm very tired of Fury still not being able to figure this out.
Yes. So, a few things that I observed going through this. At one point, when they have just returned from their previous mission, Fury gives them all a 10-day furlough. But what he says is, so I'm giving every man jack here a 10-day furlough. Man jack is something I had to go look up. It was made more difficult to look up because of the fact that there is apparently a line of men's skincare and shaving products called Everyman Jack. So one of the things about this is man jack is not a word. This is supposed to be Everyman Jack, which essentially, from my understanding, from looking this up, means every last one of you. Like every single individual is who I'm addressing here. Anyway, that just jumped out at me like every man jack. That's weird. At one point when they're having the fight in the barbershop, one beekeeper says to another, if not for your hidden vibroshock transmitter, they'd have had us. But I'll finish them off quickly now to play safe. And the one who had used the vibroshock transmitter says, no need for that. I can get all three of them at once by merely turning up this dial. Once again, it's the old Scott Evil thing of like, no, Dad, let's just go and shoot him. It's like, no, I will turn up the dial on my special super secret weapon. But then also, Nick Fury's thought balloon here is a little lame. He's saying, I was a fool. I should have known if we had hidden tricks on us, why wouldn't they have them too? It's like, wow, what a novel idea that the bad guys are going to have bad guy technology. Last thing I'll say is, you said the whole thing with Dum Dum kissing the fake manicurist, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. It was a little more complicated than that. Not complicated as in like, oh, it wasn't as gross for him to do that. No, I'm saying it was a little bit more weird in that the manicurist is being untied by Sitwell in particular, and she says to him, isn't it taking you an unusually long time to untie that knot, mister? And, his hands are down near where her butt would be, as he's untying her, and he's suddenly blushing horribly. And then Dum Dum talks about how her perfume probably has him hypnotized. She says, some chance. You heroes never even noticed that I'm not exactly a boy. So it's like, why hasn't anyone been sexually harassing me yet? And then Dum Dum goes and kisses her on the cheek, and that's when she's chasing him, and Sitwell is then, if only I'd had the nerve to do that. do the thing that is getting Dum Chase. And then the barber, it looks like, says, "Why do you think she's angry, boy? She wanted it to be you." And it's just, as I mentioned when I posted this on our social media stuff, sexual politics in Marvel Comics can get really weird.
Yes.
Yeah, so they made it just much more complicated here than it really needed to be, and not in a good way.
Yeah, that's I don't know if they ever follow up and have a romance between the manicurist and Sitwell, but I don't think they do. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to Doctor Strange, Master of the Mystic Arts. So this is a big deal. What what are you laughing at?
Oh, no, I'm just laughing about the record scratch that we're getting for this Doctor Strange story.
Yes. So, of course, Doctor Strange, pretty much acknowledged these days to be solo created by Steve Ditko. Stan Lee was credited as the writer at first on the book, Steve Ditko on pencils and inks. Eventually, Steve Ditko was credited as plotter and pencil and inker for the last 10 issues or so of this book. And Stan Lee was even gone on scripting. We had Denny O'Neil, we had some other people scripting.
We still have Denny O'Neil for part of it.
Well, part of it. And so now, suddenly, Steve Ditko has left Marvel Comics. He is the only person who has ever drawn the Doctor Strange monthly book, and we have to bring in a new artist. So, it's interesting. This time reading through Marvel Comics, I am having some different reactions to previous times I've read Marvel Comics. And my reaction to this issue is totally different than it was last time. The first time I read through Doctor Strange, I just thought this issue was a slap in the face. I was like, whoever this Bill Everett guy is, he's doing terrible art. This is terrible penciling, terrible inking, terrible art, to the extent that we would give Everett credit for the plotting. Not a fan of the plotting. Don't like this issue. What a train wreck. Doctor Strange has wrecked itself. Reading this again, I like this issue. I like the art. I like the penciling. I like the inking. I like the plotting okay. There's not a lot to this issue, but in terms of the credits, it says script pages 1 through 5, Stan Lee, our vacation and sorcerer. Script pages 6 through 10, Denny O'Neil, our sorcerer's apprentice. Has he been Dennis O'Neil for the last couple issues? I think he has, but no,
I think he might be. Well, also, here's another change that happened here, apparently. Here, Stan Lee is credited as our Smilin' Sorcerer.
Oh, it's our vacation and sorcerer here.
God, these things are so weird. And
So
it's just
weird.
like, can all of these be from like paste ups that have fallen off? And if so, I don't know, man. Okay.
It's so strange. Art Billy Everett, our peerless prestidigitator, lettering Sam Rosen, our naive necromancer, amulet polisher Irv Forbush, our stowaway. So we have Doctor Strange. I'm sorry, let me go back and say what I was going to say. So then what's happened this time reading through Marvel Comics is that I've been tracking Bill Everett a lot more. I never read Daredevil before, so reading that first issue of Daredevil, penciled and inked and presumably partially potted by Bill Everett, I really liked that issue, which I had never read before. And then I've been enjoying his work on Hulk, not as much as his work on Daredevil, but I think he's been doing a fine job on Hulk and certainly been doing a great job as inker whenever he shows up as inker. I read this Doctor Strange now coming into this more disposed to like Bill Everett, and I like this issue. We begin this issue with Doctor Strange walking the streets of Greenwich Village. Bill Everett is putting a lot of personality into the streets of Greenwich Village, both in terms of the people walking around, one of whom looks a lot like Doctor Strange back when he was down and out, washed-up surgeon.
The guy in the bottom right corner with the cigarette.
Yes, I think that the big problem with Doctor Strange until his run ends in the late 60s is that every artist who comes in the book, Stan, presumably as editor, is going to be telling them, you should be looking at what Ditko did and you should be tracing it whenever possible. And we're going to have a tremendous number of swipes from Ditko over the course of the rest of the book, including in this issue. And I think that's why that character looks so much like down and out Doctor Strange, because he was being told to look at the old Ditko books.
Maybe so. And I'm going to go ahead and jump in here and just talk about the one guy who's walking by Doctor Strange saying, man, like, there's a boss bunch of threads. That dad has got to be what's happening. And,
Of course, made me think of the first Superman movie with Christopher Reeve, where he comes out from changing in a phone booth for the first time, and there's sort of a pimp character who says, yo, Jim, that is one bad outfit. Woo!
Yeah.
And I was very much reminded of that here. Maybe this helped inspire that moment. Who knows? But even when I was a little kid watching that movie, I loved that moment. So then we have an attractively drawn woman by Everett going, Zowie, he's the ever-loving greatest. As far as I'm concerned, the mods have had it. That crazy cape really comes on strong. So then he has forgotten to change into civilian gear or put on an illusion of civilian gear. He is trying to settle a bill at the local pharmacist. It just so happens a bunch of goons come in to rob the place, not caring that there's clearly a superhero standing right there. So then he zaps them and sends them to a Ditko dimension, which is partially traced from actual Ditko dimensions, but I think that Everett does a good job with. I think he does a better job than some other people who have tried to do it. And I like the Ditko dimension on the top of page 3, which
I
again is partially just done by tracing. But
I definitely like it, but I had not caught that it was a swipe. Is there a specific panel that you noticed, or are you just
well,
saying,
just though that big mouth with the fangs on it in the
yeah,
back, I think is a swipe. I think that that is a part that is being traced directly from Ditko, or at least copied very faithfully from Ditko.
yeah,
So then he zonks the people very quickly. They're desperate to turn themselves into the police. He goes back. He talks to Wong, who we have not seen for a while. Unfortunately, Wong is drawn very caricatured by Bill Everett, very much a racist caricature of Asians, which is a shame. Then Strange decides to just do a quick recap of the book so far. And he's like, so just to catch everybody up, Baron Mordau is now my prisoner. He is being kept in another dimension. We again have Everett doing a perfectly fine job recreating Deco dimensions when he visits Baron Mordo. Then he thinks about contacting Clea and remembers things about Clea. We have actual photostated panels from Steve Ditko here as he remembers Clea and then decides, no, I'm not going to contact her, although I could. And then he just flashes back a little bit more to his history with Clea. Then he decides, I'm going to visit the Ancient One. And he visits the Ancient One, who tells him, my mentor, the person who taught me magic, Kalu, is unfortunately now coming to destroy us all. And I've got to tell you about my origin. And that is where the issue ends. Obviously, there's a lot of filler in this issue. I don't know if they were just behind in getting the issue out, and that's why there are photostats of Ditko. Or I don't know if he was just trying to reassure people, like, you're not going to lose all of Ditko's value when the book changes. I don't know if Bill Everett was just like, hey, if I'm going to spend all this time looking at Ditko pages, I want to show off how well I'm aping them by going ahead and cutting back and forth between Ditko and me, and you can't even tell the difference. I don't know. But I was shocked by how much I like this book. How about you?
I think I had a similar but not quite as dramatic a turn on this as you. Yeah, last time I read through this, I got to this and I was just like, okay, so Doctor Strange has been doing all this like cosmic interdimensional stuff, and then it's like, now let's see him on a trip to the drugstore. You know, it's
No.
like, what? No, this is not. You guys have to figure this out. But yeah, this time he's taking care of some mundane things, sure, but it doesn't bother me as much. But yeah, the depiction of Wong really has not aged well
No.
at all. You know, he's doing all of these sort of stereotypical humble Chinese servant kind of things. 1,000 pardons, master. Master, it will take money to repair this domicile, but this unworthy person begs to remind you that we are at present without funds. The whole thing about like not even referring to himself in the first person and you know, referring to himself as unworthy. It's just it's a little gross. I mean, I know for the time that would just come across as, oh yeah, this is an Asian servant character. It's yeah, it just comes across as gross these days.
And we know Wong can work because they do such a good job with him in the MCU as a equal partner of Doctor Strange. I really love MCU's Wong. I thought he was the best thing about the She-Hulk show. Of course, the odd thing about Wong in the MCU is that Doctor Strange is played by Benedict Cumberbatch, and then they have his sidekick Wong played by Benedict Wong. So Doctor Strange's same first name, and then his last name actually is Wong, the character who is playing Wong. The sort of name where you come up with and you're like, wait, his name can't be Benedict Wong. Benedict is just Doctor Strange's first name, and Wong is the actual character's last name. But it is, you know, and Wong will be handled better over the years. And in the MCU, even Wong eventually becomes Sorcerer Supreme once Strange lives out for 5 years. I like this issue. I like the art. I am looking forward to more issues. If I remember, the thing that really offended me last time I read through these was Kalu. Once we see Kalu, he's drawn in a very golden age style that I felt was nowhere near as fun as Ditko would have done. But we only get to see his floating eyes. So let's get to next issue and see if Kalu still seems to me as bad as he did first time I read this.
I think he's Kalu'u.
Kalu'u? I don't know.
Just 2 U's at the end. I'm gonna call him Kalu'u.
Okay. Any more thoughts on this issue, or should we move on?
Nope. Nah, I think we should move
Okay.
on.
I'm excited to hopefully like this book better than I liked it last time I read it. Okay.
And I am not sure if I will, because if I remember right, when I was doing my initial read through of these things, I got up to about midway through the next month when we decided to go ahead and start doing this podcast, and I started over again. So I know that I've read next month's Fantastic Four. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll be heading into new territory for me.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. We'll see how that changes this podcast. Okay.
All right, so let's move on to The Avengers, number 31, Never Bug a Giant, featuring the strange power of the Keeper. So this issue is not my favorite. I'll just say that
No.
up front. Story, Smilin' Stan Lee. Art, Dazzlin' Don Heck. Inks, Fearless Frank Jacoya. Lettering, Adorable Artie Simek. Bugle calls, Honest Irving Forbush. In the previous parts of the story, Hank Pym had absconded to South America, just South America generally, doesn't matter where, on a scooter that was not made for a 12-foot tall man who apparently was able to just fly to South America with no windscreen at that speed and not have to stop for food or bathroom breaks or whatever. So he is gone. Jan is a little upset about this. And so they've just figured out where Goliath, as they're now calling him, is. So Captain America and Wasp come in. They talk to Hawkeye, who, of course, is a bit of a smartass at first. We get a little aside just to see that Pietro and Wanda are still somewhere in Eastern Europe trying to powers back. I don't know. Dumb. So we then
Yeah.
rejoin Goliath and the prince of this whole underground secret society down here. And when we say secret society, I don't mean a secret society like the secret empire. I mean a secret society like there is a society and it is secreted below the ground.
When you say underground society, you don't mean like we are living in opposition to society's whims. You mean an actual underground society that are actually living underground.
Yes, yes. Literal in both senses of the word rather than the usual sense of the word. Goliath is with this Prince Ray, and they're trying to avoid the forces of the Keeper of the Flame.
So yes, you'll recall that last issue he ran into Prince Ray, and it seemed almost like Stan Lee was making fun of Don Heck, going like, Don Heck, why is he running away with this guy? And he just said, you've got wavy hair and you're not wearing a mustache. You must be the good guy. Well, indeed, I think Don Heck was going like, oh, shocker, Prince Ray turns out to be a bad guy in this issue. As I say in my books, generally speaking, the audience is going to be assuming that people are bad until we see them do something that is good. And this whole idea of like, oh, I'm going to shock my readers by having this person turn out to be bad, the reader is not going to be shocked by that unless we've seen some proof that the person is good. So I don't find it tremendously shocking. I don't think even Goliath finds it particularly shocking, given that last issue he's like, well, I'm just going to state right up front, I have no reason to think you're good, but I'm going to go ahead and run off with you. And then it turns out that he's like, no, I must have the cobalt flame for myself so that I can conquer mankind, essentially. Turns out he's not so good, which Goliath really should have listened to his instincts on last issue.
Well, so, like I said, this issue is just an utter mess, both in terms of character, in terms of world building, and in terms of the science. Yes, I'm going to get all nerdy and talk about how the science is more ridiculous than usual this time. Because they're talking about cobalt. On page 6, Goliath is told that this eternal flame is actually some kind of cobalt flame. Goliath says, Cobalt? The enemy we're working with today to produce an all-powerful cobalt bomb. And I was thinking, cobalt isn't radioactive, is it? And so I ended up going down a series of Wikipedia rabbit holes. Apparently, a cobalt nuclear bomb is a true doomsday weapon. And it's basically what they had in Doctor Strangelove, in that you jacket your warhead, your nuclear warhead, with a layer of cobalt, which is not itself radioactive. But when this massive wave of neutrons shoots out from the warhead, they will go ahead and bond with some of the cobalt, turning it into something that is radioactive. And it is something that will remain radioactive at a deadly level for more like 100 years rather than, it's like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those are still both cities that are inhabited to this day because the really horrible radiation drops off within 6 months to a year or something like that. The half-life is such that it becomes relatively safe for human inhabitants relatively quickly, but a cobalt bomb has a half-life that keeps it at deadly levels of radiation for somewhere around a century. So it really is something where it's like, no, they can't wait it out inside their fallout shelters if we use one of these because, they can't stay under there for 100 years. So that's what cobalt is. Cobalt, you get out of the ground, not remarkable. Anyway, but I know
Yeah.
this is comic book science. Apparently, there have been talk about a cobalt bomb. And also, according to Wikipedia, we do not know if anyone has ever actually built a cobalt bomb because, yeah, who
Well, I
would say
remember
they
later
had?
there would be a Defenders villain called Cobalt Man, and so
Yeah.
that's my number one association with it.
And that I'm sure came from the same thing, and that people talk about a cobalt bomb being really the nightmare nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
The thing is, also, when Goliath realizes that Ray is not a good guy, it's really unclear what gets across to him that he's not a good guy. Because Ray's just telling this whole story, says, and now the time has come to attack and seize the power of the flame for myself. But what of you, Giant One? Why are you so silent? Why do you not speak? Goliath says, I just realized something, Prince Ray. You're not much better than the Keeper. You don't care about the danger to mankind. You just want to control the cobalt flame for yourself. He's like, well, yeah, I'm the prince. I'm supposed to have the power here. And he's like, wow, no, you're terrible. You're horrible, and your society is terrible, and this cobalt flame is dangerous and could destroy the entire world, and we can't trust you people with this. Oh, also, these people, they make it very clear, are the true descendants of the Inca, these
Yes.
very much Northern European people with their strawberry blonde hair, which is also kind of a problem. There are all
Yeah.
sorts of tropes about the white inhabitants here who were killed by the Indians and stuff like that. And, it's just like, yeah, so many problems. Anyway, eventually the Avengers show up. The local gendarme are like, oh, okay, well, let's shoot these guys. And then someone else is like, no, 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 no. These are clearly the Avengers. They're the good guys. So then Goliath, comes in, wrecks their whole thing. The rest of the Avengers join the fight. It's a big old fight, and Don Heck's team fight scenes are never the best. So I'm not going to describe everything that happens in this fight back and forth, but Jan
Okay.
does. Jan is the one who saves the day. She basically hits the little button that unlocks the forces to come in and attack the Keeper, I believe. That is helpful. Captain America somehow figures out that if Hawkeye shoots an explosive arrow at this one precise spot on top of this, like, totem head looking computer thing, that will be the spot that will destroy the powers of these folks here. How do we know that? Never explained, but it clearly works. What was the other thing? There was something else that I don't remember. It doesn't matter. This issue doesn't matter.
No, this issue doesn't matter. I am very glad that nobody has to tell the Wasp how to rescue the other Avengers, that she just figures it out on her own. That's very good. Another big problem with this issue I've just been having with multiple issues, just not enough Avengers. We begin with, like, Goliath has ditched them. So at the beginning, it's like, hey, here we are, the Avengers, Hawkeye, Captain America, and the Wasp, two men without powers, and a woman with a very minuscule power, literally and figuratively. And then we cut to Wanda and Pietro, who unfortunately are not coming back. This has just become such a puny, unpowered book. Yeah, and then you didn't, at the end, they asked Dr. Manton, can you cure Goliath? And he says, no, there's only one man who can cure you, a man named Henry Pym. And then they're like, oh, you suck. That's the worst possible answer you could have given, Dr. Anton. We regret saving you now. But next issue, we have a legendary great issue of Avengers coming up. Stan Lee's last great and one of only great Avengers comics. And Don Heck does a pretty good job with it. So we have a turning point from Rumble Comics next issue.
I'm sorry. I remember the other observation that I had about this. The whole idea of, hey, we've found this uncontacted group of indigenous people that has this thing that is of great power and value, and clearly we can't trust these people with this thing. They clearly can't do the things that need to be done with it. We need to just take this from them, because then everything's going to be better, because colonialism. And it just very much feels like that to me too. It's just, yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah. Yep, it's a mess. Bad art. Giacoya can save. Heck, I kind of like Wonder and Pietro
Hmm.
on page 3. When you see their faces on the third panel of page 3, that looks like, who does it look like? It looks kind of like Romita.
Yeah,
The Wanda and Pietro on panel 3 of page 3 look kind of like Romita drawing them, which
I agree.
is shockingly good. But other than that, weak
Well,
art in this issue.
actually the panel right below that, I actually really like, where the first time in this issue we see Goliath and Prince Ray walking through the caverns of this underground world. I honestly really love that panel. Somehow Don Heck and Frank Giacoya were able to come together to make a really nice looking panel here, if very few other places in the issue.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Steve, let's go ahead and wrap up. That was August of 1966. There were some good comics. There were some weak comics. I am enjoying doing this with you. We are going through it, and it is fun rereading all these Marvel comics. And hey, I'm pleasantly surprised by liking Doctor Strange better. So I've been sort of dreading the change in Doctor Strange for all these months, and now I'm not dreading it anymore. So let's see how that goes.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, we are, if not next month, then certainly the one afterwards, going to be entering uncharted territory for me. So these things will all be new to me when we get not much further. So I'm excited for uncharted territory, and so I believe that's it. Shall we go ahead and sign off?
All right, let's go ahead and sign off. Okay, America, we will talk to you soon. Goodbye.
And as always, the rest of the world as well. Take
Okay,
care, everybody, and stay safe.
bye.
Thanks for listening to Marvel Reread Club. Please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Your reviews and ratings are a great help and always appreciated. We love hearing from you. Go to marvelrereadclub.com to find notes and join the discussion about this episode. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.